The alarm goes off at 6 a.m. You stumble to the kitchen, grab your phone, check Instagram, make coffee. Same routine every day, just trying to survive in the modern world. Now picture this, it's 40,000 years ago. No alarm, no phone, no coffee. But here's the thing that'll blow your mind. Our ancient ancestors, they were living better than us in ways we're only starting to understand. So, if these stories help you relax or whatever, hit like or subscribe. Also curious where everyone's at, comment your city and time, reading through last video's comments and seeing Miami, Manchester and Melbourne all in there. The internet's weird, right? Everything you think you know about cavemen is wrong. The club-dragging, grunting, primitive humans from cartoons. Total fiction. The real story is so much more incredible, and honestly, it's going to make you question everything about how we live today. Meet your great-great-great-grandfather. Time's about 2000. He's standing outside what you'd call his house, but it's not a dark, damp cave. It's actually a sophisticated shelter he built from mammoth bones, covered with carefully prepared hides, complete with multiple rooms and a central fireplace that never goes out. The fire isn't just for warmth, it's the heart of his technology. This guy, he's about to start his day, and his daily routine is about to shatter every stereotype you've ever heard. First thing he does when the sun hits his face, he doesn't grunt and scratch. He checks the wind direction, feels the air pressure, examines animal tracks from the night before. This dude is reading the environment like you read your weather app, except he's better at it. See, here's what nobody tells you about prehistoric humans. They had to be geniuses to survive. Think about it. No Google, no YouTube tutorials, no instruction manuals. Everything they knew, they figured out themselves or learned from others who figured it out. And they were dealing with challenges that would absolutely destroy us. Imagine waking up knowing that today you might face a cave bear or a pack of wolves, or you might need to track a mammoth across frozen tundra for 3 days with nothing but tools you made yourself from rocks. But here's where it gets really wild. Recent discoveries are proving these people weren't just surviving, they were thriving, creating art, making music, developing complex social structures, and doing things that we're still trying to figure out how they manage. Let me tell you about the day archaeologists found something that changed everything. It was 2008. A team was digging in Geissenkloster cave in Germany. Just another day of sifting through 40,000-year-old dirt. Then they found it, a small piece of carved mammoth ivory, about the size of your finger. At first, nobody knew what it was, but when they put it back together, it was a flute, a musical instrument, perfectly crafted, with finger holes spaced precisely to create actual melodies. Let that sink in. 40,000 years ago, someone sat down and created music, not just noise, not just banging rocks together. They engineered an instrument that could play complex tunes. This was caveman Mozart. But wait, it gets better. When researchers tested these flutes, they discovered something incredible. The hole spacing matched the mathematical ratios we use in modern musical instruments. These weren't random holes. Someone understood acoustics, sound waves, harmony. This completely destroyed the idea that our ancestors were primitive. You can't create sophisticated musical instruments without advanced knowledge of physics, mathematics, and engineering. These people were scientists, and that's just the beginning. Remember how we're always complaining about not getting enough sleep, about insomnia, about being tired all the time? Well, scientists studied modern hunter-gatherer tribes to understand how cavemen slept. What they found is amazing. Cavemen slept better than us, way better. They went to bed about 3 hours after sunset, not when they were exhausted, when their bodies naturally wanted to sleep. They woke up about an hour before sunrise, again, naturally, no alarm clocks needed. Here's the crazy part. In the modern tribes they studied, researchers found that all 94 people rarely woke up during the night. and there's literally no word for insomnia in their language. None. Because it doesn't exist for them. Meanwhile, 48% of Americans report insomnia regularly. These cavemen figured out something we've completely lost. They also discovered that temperature, not light, controlled sleep patterns. As the air cooled after sunset, their bodies naturally prepared for sleep. As it warmed before dawn, they naturally woke up. Their sleeping areas weren't heated caves. They slept outside or in simple shelters, staying connected to natural temperature cycles. We live in climate-controlled boxes and wonder why we can't sleep. But let's talk about what they actually did all day, because this is where the stereotypes really fall apart. First off, most cavemen didn't live in caves. I know. Mind blown. Caves were used sometimes, usually as temporary shelter or for special purposes, but these people were nomadic. They built sophisticated temporary structures that they could pack up and move. Think about that level of engineering. You need to create a home that's warm, weatherproof, defendable, and portable, with no hardware store, no YouTube videos, just your brain and whatever materials you can find. They built dome-shaped huts using flexible wooden frames covered with animal hides. Some used mammoth bones as structural supports. These weren't crude lean-tos. Archaeological evidence shows these shelters had different areas for different activities. Sleeping areas, work areas, food storage areas, even waste disposal systems. Inside, they organised their space like we organise our homes. Tools in one area, food preparation in another, sleeping areas positioned for maximum warmth from the central fire. They even had stone floors in some shelters, carefully laid out for drainage. But here's what really gets me. They were artists. Not just the famous cave paintings everyone knows about. We're talking about sophisticated artistic traditions that lasted thousands of years. They carved intricate figurines, created jewelry from shells and animal teeth, made decorative objects that served no practical purpose other than beauty. The Venus of Willendorf, carved 30,000 years ago, shows incredible artistic skill, detailed proportions, sophisticated understanding of human anatomy. This wasn't someone randomly chipping at a stone. This was a trained artist. They also made paint, not just any paint. They had paint factories, actual manufacturing sites where they ground ochre, mixed binders, and created different colours: red, yellow, black, white. They understood chemistry well enough to create permanent pigments that are still vibrant 40,000 years later. And they didn't just paint on cave walls. They painted their bodies, their tools, their shelters. Art wasn't separate from daily life. It was integrated into everything they did. Now let's talk about their work day, because this is where modern humans would probably quit immediately. These people were making their own everything: tools, clothes, shelter, food, medicine, everything from scratch every single day. But here's the thing that shocked researchers. They were incredibly efficient. Modern hunter-gatherer studies show that people living traditional lifestyles only work about 4 to 6 hours per day on survival tasks. The rest of their time, social interaction, storytelling, playing games, creating art, relaxing. We work 8 to 10 hours a day and still struggle to cover basic needs like food and shelter. They worked half that and thrived. Why? Because they were masters of their environment. They knew exactly which plants to eat and when, which animals to hunt and how, where to find water, how to predict weather, where to shelter during storms. They carried this knowledge in their heads, thousands of years of accumulated wisdom passed down through generations. No books, no internet, just human memory and direct teaching. A single caveman knew more about survival than most modern humans learn in a lifetime. They could identify hundreds of edible plants, track dozens of different animals, predict weather patterns, navigate using stars, create fire in any conditions, make tools from raw materials, treat injuries and illnesses with plant medicines. They were walking encyclopedias. But they weren't doing all this alone. Here's another myth that needs to die. Cavemen weren't isolated family groups struggling against nature. They lived in sophisticated social networks that spanned enormous distances. Archaeologists have found seashells hundreds of miles from the ocean, obsidian tools thousands of miles from the quarry sites, amber jewellery from regions far from where it's naturally found. This means trade networks, communication between groups, regular contact across vast distances. They were more connected to each other than many modern people are. These networks weren't just for trading materials. They shared knowledge, techniques for making tools, information about animal migrations, weather patterns, food sources. Innovations spread through these networks faster than you might think. When someone in what's now France figured out a better way to make spear points, that knowledge would reach Germany within decades, not through phones or internet, through human networks maintained by regular contact and migration. They also took care of each other in ways that would put modern communities to shame. Archaeological evidence shows disabled individuals who lived full lives supported by their groups, healed bones from serious injuries that would have required months of care, elderly people who lived well past their productive years. These weren't societies that abandoned the weak. They were communities that valued everyone. And they were raising children in these environments, kids who learned by watching, participating, and playing, not sitting in classrooms for 12 years trying to memorize information they'd never use. Caveman children learned practical skills that directly related to their survival and prosperity. By age 10, they could make fire, identify edible plants, track animals, and create simple tools. By 15, they were fully contributing members of society with skills that took decades to master. Modern kids graduate high school and still don't know how to balance a checkbook. But here's what really blows my mind about these people. They were innovators, constantly improving and developing new technologies. The archaeological record shows continuous innovation over thousands of years. Tools getting more sophisticated, techniques becoming more refined, art becoming more complex. They weren't stuck in a primitive state. They were evolving and advancing constantly. They invented the spear thrower, which increased hunting range by 300%. They developed pressure flaking techniques that created tools so sharp they rival modern surgical instruments. They figured out how to store food for months using natural preservation methods. They even had specialized tools for specialized tasks, different arrowheads for different types of game, scrapers designed specifically for processing hides, engraving tools for creating detailed artwork, needles for sewing clothes, fishing hooks for catching specific types of fish. This level of specialization indicates advanced planning and sophisticated understanding of tool design. You don't develop 20 different types of scrapers unless you really understand materials science. And we haven't even talked about the most mind-blowing discovery yet. In 2022, researchers announced something that changed everything we thought we knew about caveman intelligence. They studied brain activity in modern humans learning to make ancient stone tools. What they found was shocking. Making Paleolithic tools activates the same brain networks used by modern pianists, the same neural pathways, the same complex motor planning, the same working memory systems. In other words, learning to make stone tools 2 million years ago was as cognitively demanding as learning to play classical piano today. These weren't primitive people banging rocks together. They were highly skilled craftsmen performing complex cognitive tasks that required years of training to master. Think about what this means. Every adult in a caveman community had musical-level coordination and cognitive ability just to make their basic survival tools. We're talking about societies where everyone was essentially a highly trained specialist, where the baseline level of skill and knowledge required for daily life exceeded what most modern people develop in their entire careers. But here's the thing that really gets me. We've lost most of these abilities. We can't make fire without matches, can't find food without grocery stores, can't navigate without GPS, can't predict weather without apps. We've gained incredible technological power, but we've lost the fundamental skills that kept humans alive for 300,000 years. So when you think about the average caveman, don't picture a grunting primitive. Picture a highly intelligent, skilled, creative, socially connected individual who could handle challenges that would defeat most modern humans. Picture someone who could look at a piece of rock and see a sophisticated tool, who could examine animal tracks and know exactly where dinner was hiding, who could read the sky and predict tomorrow's weather with better accuracy than your weather app. Picture someone who made art for the joy of it, music for the community spirit, and innovations that improved life for generations. And then ask yourself, if they could do all this with nothing but their brains, their hands, and the natural world around them, what does that say about human potential? What does it say about what we might be capable of if we really tried? Because the most shocking truth about cavemen isn't how primitive they were, it's how incredibly advanced they were, and how much we still have to learn from them. The answer to that question takes us back 2.6 million years, to a moment that changed everything. Picture the African savanna. It's hot, dry, dangerous. Early hominids are struggling to survive. They're not quite human yet, but they're not apes either. They're something in between. And they're about to make a discovery that will lead directly to those sophisticated cave artists we just talked about. Someone picks up a rock. Not to throw it, not to use it as a hammer. They look at it and see something else entirely. They see a tool that doesn't exist yet, but could. They strike that rock with another rock, deliberately, precisely, and create the first human technology. This moment is so important that archaeologists have a name for it, the Oldowan Revolution, and it's where the story of human intelligence really begins. But here's what nobody tells you about those first stone tools. They weren't crude accidents. Recent analysis shows that even the earliest tool makers understood physics, geometry, and materials science. To make a useful stone tool, you need to understand how force travels through rock. You need to predict exactly where fractures will occur. You need to know which types of stone work and which don't. You need the hand-eye coordination of a surgeon. This isn't monkey see, monkey do. This is complex problem-solving that requires the kind of abstract thinking we associate with modern humans, and once they figured it out, everything changed. Tools meant they could process food more efficiently, cut meat, crack bones for marrow, access nutrients that were previously impossible to get. Better nutrition led to bigger brains led to better tools. It was an evolutionary feedback loop that would continue for millions of years. But the real game changer came about 1.8 million years ago. That's when early humans discovered fire. Not just using fire. Anyone can pick up a burning branch from a lightning-struck tree, controlling fire, making fire, keeping fire alive. This discovery was so revolutionary that some scientists think it's what made us human. Fire changed everything about how early humans lived. Suddenly, they could cook food. Cooked food is easier to digest, provides more calories, and unlocks nutrients that are inaccessible in raw food. This nutritional boost fueled rapid brain growth. But fire did more than just improve their diet. It extended their day. Before fire, human activity was limited by daylight. After fire, they could work, socialize, and create long into the night. Fire also provided protection. Predators that would happily attack sleeping humans thought twice about approaching a group gathered around a blazing campfire. This safety allowed humans to sleep more soundly and for longer periods, which is crucial for brain development and memory consolidation. And fire enabled humans to expand into new territories. Suddenly, they could survive in colder climates. The frozen tundra of Europe became habitable. Mountain regions opened up. Desert nights became survivable. Fire was the technology that turned humans from a regional African species into a global phenomenon. But here's the mind-blowing part. The earliest evidence of controlled fire use dates back 2 million years. That means early humans were master firekeepers for 1.96 million years before agriculture was invented. Let that sink in. Fire technology was so important that humans perfected it and relied on it for almost 2 million years. That's 40 times longer than recorded human history. And they didn't just make fire, they became fire experts. Archaeological evidence shows that early humans understood different types of fire for different purposes. Quick, hot fires for cooking meat, slow, steady fires for warmth, smoky fires for preserving food, underground fires for heating stones used in earth ovens. They knew which wood burned hottest, which created the least smoke, which was best for making charcoal. They understood fire like modern people understand electricity. This expertise was passed down through generations. Firekeeping became one of the most important skills in human society, and losing fire could be deadly. Some groups maintained perpetual fires that burned continuously for months or even years. Moving these fires from camp to camp required specialized tools and techniques. Others developed methods for quickly creating fire using friction, sparks, or other methods. But while all this was happening, something even more important was developing. Language. Now, nobody knows exactly when humans started talking. Language doesn't fossilize, but we can make educated guesses based on other evidence. The ability to make sophisticated tools requires the ability to teach complex skills, and teaching complex skills requires sophisticated communication. You can't pass down knowledge about pressure flaking or fire making through grunts and gestures alone. By 800,000 years ago, archaeological evidence suggests that early humans were planning complex, coordinated activities, group hunts that required careful timing, tool-making that involved multiple steps performed in sequence, long-distance migrations that required navigation and planning. All of this indicates sophisticated communication, maybe not Shakespeare, but definitely complex language capable of expressing abstract ideas, future plans, and detailed instructions. And once humans could talk to each other effectively, innovation accelerated dramatically. Instead of each individual having to figure everything out from scratch, knowledge could be shared, techniques could be taught, improvements could be communicated across groups and generations. This created the first information networks in human history. Think about what this means. A better hunting technique developed in what's now Kenya could spread to groups in Tanzania within a few years. A new tool-making method discovered in Morocco could reach Spain within decades. Humans became the first species to develop culture that improved faster than genetics. Instead of waiting millions of years for evolutionary adaptations, they could develop behavioral adaptations in a single generation and pass them on immediately. This is when humans stopped being just another animal species and became something entirely new. But language did more than just improve technology transfer. It created the possibility for abstract thought, storytelling, and shared beliefs. Suddenly, humans could talk about things that weren't physically present. They could discuss the past and plan for the future. They could share ideas about meaning, purpose, and the nature of existence. This cognitive revolution is what eventually led to art, music, religion, and complex social structures. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let's go back to those early toolmakers and trace how their simple stone implements became the sophisticated technologies we discussed earlier. The progression is actually mind-blowing when you understand what was really happening. Those first Alderwan tools from 2.6 million years ago were simple but effective. Choppers, scrapers, and sharp flakes created by striking rocks together. Basic but functional, but by 1.76 million years ago, early humans were making hand axes. Not just better tools, but tools that required completely different thinking. Hand axes are symmetrical. They have a deliberate shape. They're designed according to an abstract mental template that exists only in the toolmaker's mind. This is huge. It means early humans could conceive of something that didn't exist and then create it. They could hold an abstract ideal in their minds and work systematically to achieve it. Hand axes also required long-term planning. Unlike simple choppers that could be made in a few minutes, hand axes took hours of careful work. The toolmaker had to envision the final product and work systematically through dozens of precise strikes to achieve it. And here's the really wild part. Hand axes from this period are often far more sophisticated than they needed to be for their practical function. Many show signs of being crafted for aesthetic reasons as much as utilitarian ones. Some archaeologists think hand axes were the first human attempt at creating beauty for its own sake, but the tools kept getting more sophisticated. By 400,000 years ago, early humans had developed the levallois technique. This involved preparing stone cores in advance so that perfect tools could be quickly struck off when needed. It's like pre-manufacturing. They would spend hours carefully shaping a stone core, and then when they needed a tool, they could strike off a perfect blade in seconds. This requires incredible spatial reasoning and forward planning. The toolmaker has to envision the entire sequence of strikes, understand how each one will affect the final product, and work backwards from the desired result. Modern researchers have tried to learn these techniques. It takes years of training to master them. And even with modern understanding of physics and engineering, many people can't do it. Yet every adult in Paleolithic communities had these skills. By 50,000 years ago, tool technology exploded into dozens of specialized implements: spear points, scrapers, burins, needles, fish hooks, harpoons, each designed for specific tasks and crafted with incredible precision. The technological sophistication of late Paleolithic tools rivals modern manufacturing in many ways. Some stone blades are sharper than modern surgical instruments. Some spear points are aerodynamically perfect. This wasn't primitive technology. This was advanced engineering using Stone Age materials, but tools were just one part of the story. Humans were also developing increasingly sophisticated social structures. Early human groups started small, maybe 20-30 individuals living and traveling together. But as their tools and techniques improved, group sizes grew. Larger groups meant more specialization was possible. Some individuals could focus on tool making, while others specialized in hunting or plant gathering. This division of labor led to even better tools and more efficient food acquisition. But larger groups also created new challenges. How do you coordinate the activities of 100 people? How do you resolve conflicts? How do you make group decisions? Humans developed social technologies to solve these problems. Leadership structures, conflict resolution methods, systems for sharing resources and information. They also developed rituals and traditions that helped maintain group cohesion, shared stories that reinforced group identity, ceremonies that marked important transitions, art and music that brought everyone together. These weren't just entertainment, they were social technologies as important as stone tools for group survival. And humans were using these technologies to spread across the entire planet. The migration story is absolutely incredible when you really think about it. Starting from Africa, early humans walked to every continent except Antarctica. They crossed deserts, mountains, frozen tundra, and eventually even oceans. They adapted to climates from tropical rainforests to Arctic ice sheets. Each new environment required new adaptations, new tools, new hunting techniques, new shelter designs, new food sources. Humans who migrated to cold climates developed specialized cold weather clothing, heating techniques, and preserved food technologies. Those who moved to coastal areas became expert fishermen and boat builders. Mountain dwellers developed high-altitude survival skills. But here's what's amazing. They maintained contact with each other across these vast distances. Archaeological evidence shows that innovation continued to spread between widely separated groups. A new spear point design developed in Africa would appear in Europe within a few thousand years. Artistic styles and techniques spread across continents. This means humans maintained social and trade networks spanning thousands of miles without any technology more advanced than their own feet. They were creating the first global civilization. By 40,000 years ago, humans had spread from the southern tip of Africa to the Arctic Circle, from Atlantic coastlines to Pacific islands. They had adapted to every climate on Earth and developed hundreds of different local cultures, but they all shared certain common elements. Tool-making technologies, fire management, language, art, music, social cooperation. These were human universals that emerged from our shared evolutionary heritage. And in each location, they were solving the same basic survival challenges with incredible creativity and intelligence. How do you find food in a desert? How do you stay warm in an ice age? How do you cross a river? How do you store food for winter? How do you treat illness and injury? Early humans found solutions to all of these problems, solutions that worked so well that some are still used by traditional societies today. They developed dozens of different methods for making fire, hundreds of techniques for processing food, thousands of medicines derived from plants, navigation methods using stars, landmarks, and natural phenomena. They created technologies for every aspect of human life. And they did it all without schools, books, or formal education systems. Every individual learned by watching, practicing, and direct teaching from experts. Knowledge was preserved in human memory and passed down through generations of hands-on training. This created societies where every adult was a master of multiple complex skills, where the baseline level of competence was extraordinarily high. But the most incredible thing about this whole evolutionary journey is where it led. Those early toolmakers who first struck rock against rock 2.6 million years ago set in motion a chain of developments that would eventually produce the sophisticated cave artists, musicians, and innovators we talked about in the beginning. The path from simple stone choppers to mammoth ivory flutes took millions of years, but it was a direct path. Each innovation built on previous discoveries. Each generation improved on what came before. And by 40,000 years ago, humans had become something unprecedented in the history of life on Earth. They were a species that could adapt to any environment not through genetic evolution, but through cultural innovation. They could solve new problems in a single generation and pass those solutions on immediately. They had become the ultimate survivors, not because they were the strongest or fastest or best adapted to any particular environment, but because they could think their way out of any challenge, and they were just getting started, because while all this technological and social development was happening, something else was emerging, something that would define human civilization for the next 40,000 years, the explosion of symbolic thought that we call the Upper Paleolithic Revolution. This is when humans stopped just making tools and started making meaning, when they began creating art, music, jewelry, and ritual objects, when they started burying their dead with grave goods, when they began decorating their bodies and their environments, when they became fully modern humans in every sense we would recognize today. But that revolution didn't happen overnight. It was the culmination of millions of years of evolution, innovation, and cultural development. And understanding how it happened helps explain why those cave painters and flute makers were so incredibly sophisticated. They weren't primitive people who accidentally stumbled onto art and music. They were the inheritors of millions of years of human innovation, the latest generation in an unbroken chain of technological and cultural development stretching back to the very first toolmaker. They had better brains, better tools, better social systems, and better knowledge than any humans who had come before them. They were the pinnacle of Paleolithic achievement, the most successful survivors in human history, and they used all of that accumulated wisdom to create a way of life that modern science is only now beginning to understand and appreciate. So what did a typical day actually look like for one of these pinnacle of evolution humans? Let's follow Crog around for 24 hours. Yeah, I'm calling him Crog. It's probably not his real name, but we'll never know what he actually called himself. What we do know is everything else about his life, and it's going to blow your mind. It's about 35,000 years ago. We're in what will someday be southern France. Crog is 28 years old, which makes him middle-aged by the standards of his time. He's got a wife, 2 kids, and more responsibilities than any modern CEO. The sun hasn't risen yet, but Crog is awake. Not because he has insomnia, not because he's stressed about work. His body just naturally woke up as the temperature started rising. His circadian rhythm is perfectly synchronized with the natural world. He's lying on a bed that would surprise you. It's not a pile of animal skins thrown on the ground. It's a carefully constructed sleeping surface made from layers of grass covered with processed hides with natural padding made from pine needles and feathers. It's actually more comfortable than a lot of modern camping equipment. But here's the really interesting part. He's not sleeping alone. The whole family sleeps together in one area of their shelter. Parents, kids, sometimes grandparents. This isn't because they don't have space. It's a deliberate choice. Modern sleep researchers have discovered that people who sleep in the same room as family members have better sleep quality, feel more secure, and have stronger social bonds. Cavemen figured this out 35,000 years ago. Crog quietly gets up, careful not to wake anyone else. The first thing he does is check the fire, not because it went out, but because maintaining fire is literally a matter of life and death. This isn't the kind of fire you see in movies. It's not a roaring campfire. It's a carefully managed, sophisticated heating system. Multiple fires, actually, each designed for different purposes. There's the main fire in the center of the shelter for warmth and general cooking, a smaller, hotter fire for specialized work like heating stones or making tools, a smoky fire near the entrance for keeping insects away, and usually a backup fire kept burning with slow-burning wood that can smolder for hours. Crog knows exactly how each fire should look, smell, and sound. He can tell from the color of the flames whether they need more fuel, more air, or different types of wood. This is engineering-level expertise applied to fire management. He adds specific types of wood to each fire. Hardwood for long-burning heat, softwood for quick flames, aromatic wood for pleasant smells. different woods for different purposes, all based on knowledge passed down through generations. Next, he checks the weather, but not by looking at an app. He steps outside and reads the environment like a book. Wind direction and strength, cloud formation and color, how the air smells and feels, animal behavior, plant movement, sound patterns. He's processing dozens of environmental variables to predict not just today's weather, but conditions for the next several days. This information will determine everything about his day, what activities are possible, where the group might need to move, what food sources will be available, whether they need to prepare for storms. Modern meteorologists, with all their technology, are accurate about 65% of the time for 5-day forecasts. Crog and his people, using only observation and experience, were probably more accurate than that. While he's outside, he's also checking security, looking for tracks of large predators, signs that other human groups have been in the area, evidence of animals that might be hunted, changes in local water sources. This isn't paranoia, it's survival intelligence. Crog needs to know about any threats or opportunities in a several-mile radius around their camp. His family's life depends on this information. By the time he comes back inside, other family members are starting to wake up, but there's no rush, no frantic scrambling to get ready for work. The daily routine flows naturally based on environmental conditions and group needs. His wife, let's call her Naya, is an expert in her own right. She knows more about plant identification, food preparation, hide processing, and textile creation than most modern people know about anything. She's already checking their food stores and planning meals based on what's available and what the day's activities will require. This isn't just grab something to eat. It's nutritional planning that considers energy requirements, available ingredients, cooking time, and storage needs. Their breakfast is probably better balanced than what most modern people eat. Wild game meat for protein, nuts and seeds for healthy fats, berries and other fruits for vitamins and quick energy, root vegetables for complex carbohydrates, all fresh, organic and locally sourced. They also drink herbal teas made from plants that provide specific health benefits, some for energy, some for digestion, some for immune system support. Naya knows dozens of different plant medicines and uses them preventively. The kids, by the way, aren't just sitting around waiting to be fed. The 8-year-old is already helping with fire management. The 12-year-old is checking and maintaining tools. Child labour? No. Education. These kids are learning survival skills by participating in real activities with real consequences. They're not memorizing abstract information they'll never use. They're developing practical expertise that directly relates to their future success and survival. By age 10, these children can make fire, identify edible plants, track animals, create simple tools, and navigate using natural landmarks. They have more practical skills than most modern college graduates. After breakfast, the family discusses the day's plans. This isn't Dad making unilateral decisions. It's a group consultation where everyone's expertise and observations are considered. Crog might have noticed animal tracks suggesting good hunting opportunities. Naya might have identified plant foods that are ready for harvest. The kids might have observed weather patterns or interesting geological features. Decisions are made based on all available information: where to go, what to do, how to divide tasks, what tools and equipment to bring. Today, they've decided to move camp, not because there's any emergency, but because they've exhausted local resources and seasonal patterns indicate better opportunities elsewhere. This decision requires incredible coordination and planning. Everything they own needs to be packed efficiently. The route needs to be planned considering terrain, weather, water sources, and potential hazards. New campsites need to be scouted and evaluated. Modern families stress out about moving across town. These people regularly moved their entire lives across landscapes filled with deadly predators and hostile environments. But they make it look easy because they've optimized every aspect of the process. Their possessions are designed for portability, lightweight but durable tools, multi-purpose items that serve several functions, collapsible shelters that pack efficiently. Everything has been carefully selected for maximum utility with minimum weight. Naya can pack the entire household in about an hour, not because they don't have much stuff, but because everything has a designated place and a systematic packing order. The route planning is equally sophisticated. Crog knows the terrain for hundreds of miles in every direction. Water sources, seasonal food availability, safe camping spots, dangerous areas to avoid. He's carrying a mental map more detailed than anything GPS can provide. They also have multiple backup plans. If the preferred route is blocked by weather or predators, they have alternative paths. If the intended destination is unsuitable, they have backup locations. This level of planning and contingency thinking rivals what modern expedition leaders do with teams of specialists and high-tech equipment. The actual move is like watching a perfectly choreographed dance. Everyone knows their role. Everything happens in the right sequence. There's no wasted motion or duplicated effort. Crog and the older boy take down the main shelter structure. Naya and the younger child pack household items. Each person has specific responsibilities and they work together with efficiency that would impress modern logistics experts. But they're not just moving randomly. They're following seasonal migration patterns that their people have used for thousands of years, patterns that take them to the best hunting grounds at exactly the right times, to plant foods when they're perfectly ripe, to water sources that are most reliable during different seasons. These migration routes are cultural technologies as sophisticated as the tools they carry, generations of accumulated knowledge about optimal resource utilization across vast landscapes and annual cycles. The journey itself is another masterclass in environmental awareness and group coordination. Crog leads, but he's constantly communicating with the rest of the group. Hand signals indicating changes in direction, vocal calls warning of obstacles or interesting discoveries, gestures suggesting rest stops or alternative routes. Everyone is contributing observations and expertise. Naya spots edible plants along the way and marks their locations for potential future use. The kids identify animal tracks and practice their tracking skills. They're not just travelling, they're constantly gathering information, updating their mental maps and expanding their knowledge of the territory. When they stop for lunch, it's not just a meal break, it's a strategic pause that serves multiple purposes. The location is chosen for specific advantages: good visibility for security, access to water, shelter from wind, proximity to useful resources. While eating, they're processing all the information they've gathered during the morning's travel, discussing what they've observed, updating plans based on new information, making decisions about the afternoon's route. The kids are being educated through direct experience and expert commentary. They're learning to read landscapes, interpret animal behavior, identify useful plants, and think strategically about travel and resource management. After lunch, they continue toward their planned destination, but they're flexible. If they discover better opportunities or unexpected obstacles, they adjust their plans accordingly. This adaptability is one of the keys to their success. They have strong plans, but they're not rigid about executing them. They respond intelligently to changing conditions. By late afternoon, they've reached their destination, a spot that Crog scouted during a previous journey. It has everything they need: fresh water, natural shelter, good hunting and gathering opportunities, defensible position, nice views. Setting up the new camp is another exercise in expertise and efficiency. The shelter goes up quickly because they've done this hundreds of times. Everyone knows the process. The structure is engineered for quick assembly and maximum stability. But they're not just throwing up a tent, they're creating a home. The interior layout is carefully planned. Work areas are positioned for optimal light and ventilation. Sleeping areas are arranged for warmth and privacy. Storage areas keep food and tools organized and accessible. They also set up the fire systems, organize tool storage, establish water collection points, and create waste management areas. Within a few hours, they've created a fully functional living environment. By evening, they're settled into their new home, and now the really interesting part of caveman life begins. This is when they had time for things that weren't directly related to survival. Art, music, storytelling, games, social bonding. Crog spends time working on a new spear point, not because he needs it immediately, but because he enjoys the craft and wants to perfect his technique. This is art as much as tool making. Naya is working on a textile project, weaving plant fibers into a bag using patterns that are both functional and beautiful. Again, this is creative expression combined with practical skill. The kids are playing games that are also educational, tracking games that improve observation skills, throwing games that develop hand-eye coordination, strategy games that enhance planning and problem-solving abilities. But the evening isn't just individual activities, it's also community time. Storytelling is huge in caveman culture. Stories that pass down technical knowledge, stories that preserve historical information, stories that teach moral lessons, stories that are just entertaining. These stories are the internet, library, and entertainment system all rolled into one. They're how knowledge is preserved and transmitted across generations. Music is equally important. Instrumental music using those sophisticated flutes we talked about earlier. Vocal music that strengthens group bonds and coordination. Rhythmic music that accompanies work and ceremonial activities. Dancing is common too, not just for entertainment, but as a form of exercise, artistic expression, and social bonding. These aren't primitive people sitting around grunting. These are sophisticated humans engaging in complex cultural activities that require high levels of skill and creativity. As the evening progresses, the family gradually prepares for sleep. But this isn't just putting on pajamas and brushing teeth. They're conducting a security review, making sure the fires are properly banked for overnight burning, checking that tools and weapons are positioned for quick access, reviewing the next day's plans and responsibilities. The sleeping arrangements are optimized for warmth, comfort, and security. Family members position themselves to share body heat efficiently. Parents position themselves to protect children. Everyone sleeps lightly enough to respond quickly to any disturbance. When they finally sleep, it's the deep, restorative sleep that comes from physical activity, natural circadian rhythms, and secure social bonds. And in the morning, the whole cycle begins again, with variations based on weather, season, local conditions, and group needs. What strikes me most about this daily routine is how integrated everything is. Work and education and entertainment and social bonding all happen together. There's no artificial separation between different aspects of life. These people weren't struggling to survive. They were living rich, complex, sophisticated lives that balanced practical necessities with creative expression and social fulfillment. They had challenges we can't imagine, but they also had freedoms and satisfactions that we've largely lost. They worked as much as they needed to, but no more. They had strong family and community bonds. They lived in direct connection with the natural world. They had clear purposes and meaningful roles in their society. Most importantly, they had mastery, real expertise in skills that directly contributed to their well-being and survival. That's what a day in the life of an average caveman actually looked like. Not primitive struggle, but sophisticated living that balanced survival with quality of life in ways that modern society is still trying to figure out. But let's be real, life wasn't all mammoth ivory flutes and perfectly coordinated camp moves. These people faced challenges that would absolutely annihilate modern civilization. And I'm not talking about running out of coffee or Wi-Fi going down. I'm talking about existential threats that could wipe out entire groups in a matter of days. Remember, this was a world where everything wanted to kill you. The landscape was crawling with predators that make modern dangerous animals look like house pets. Cave bears that weighed 800 pounds and could bite through bones. Saber-toothed cats with 7-inch fangs designed for slicing through thick hides. Dire wolves that hunted in packs of 30 or more. But the apex predator, cave lions, these weren't African lions that wandered into a cave. These were a completely different species, bigger, stronger, and specifically adapted for hunting humans. Archaeological evidence shows that cave lions actively hunted early humans, not just opportunistically, but systematically. They learned human behavior patterns, they followed human migration routes, they developed hunting strategies specifically designed to take down human groups. Imagine trying to sleep knowing that somewhere in the darkness a 400-pound killing machine was tracking your scent and planning the best way to attack your family, and that was just one threat among dozens. The environment itself was constantly trying to kill them. We're talking about the Ice Age, not the cute animated movie version, the real thing. Temperatures that dropped 50 degrees below zero, blizzards that lasted for weeks, ice sheets advancing and retreating unpredictably, destroying everything in their path. During the worst periods, most of Europe was uninhabitable. The landscape looked like Antarctica. No plants, no animals, nothing but ice and death. But somehow, humans survived. Not just survived, thrived. How? By developing survival strategies so effective that they kept our species alive through multiple near-extinction events. Take the Lachamp event. About 42,000 years ago, Earth's magnetic field almost disappeared. Cosmic radiation bombarded the planet, the ozone layer was shredded, temperatures plummeted, most large animals went extinct. This was basically an apocalypse, the kind of disaster that would end modern civilization in months, but early humans made it through, and we know exactly how they did it. They went underground, not just hiding in caves, they created elaborate underground survival systems, multi-chamber complexes with sophisticated ventilation, water collection, food storage, and waste management. These weren't crude holes in the ground. They were engineered survival bunkers that could sustain large groups for months or even years. The Bruniquel cave in France contains evidence of one of these survival complexes. 176,000 years ago, Neanderthals built elaborate structures deep underground using carefully arranged stalagmites. We're talking about architecture 140,000 years before the earliest known buildings. But surviving environmental disasters was just the beginning of their challenges. They also had to deal with resource competition. When food was scarce, different human groups would come into conflict over hunting territories, water sources, and tool-making materials. These weren't polite disagreements settled through negotiation. These were life-or-death conflicts where losing meant your entire group starved or was wiped out. Archaeological evidence shows clear signs of prehistoric warfare, mass graves containing victims of violent attacks, defensive fortifications around settlements, weapons specifically designed for fighting other humans rather than animals. But here's what's fascinating. Most of the time, they found ways to avoid conflict through sophisticated diplomatic strategies. Trade networks served as early peace treaties. If two groups were trading with each other, they were less likely to fight. Marriage exchanges created family connections between groups that reduced hostilities. Shared religious or cultural practices built alliances that could last for generations. They developed conflict resolution systems that were more effective than many modern diplomatic efforts. But when diplomacy failed, they were absolutely ruthless. The Ovnet cave in Germany contains evidence of what appears to be a massacre from about 6,500 years ago. 34 heads, mostly women and children, carefully arranged in what seems to be a ritual execution. Someone sent a very clear message about what happened to groups that crossed certain lines. These people understood that sometimes violence was necessary for survival, and when they fought with the same intelligence and planning they applied to everything else. But warfare wasn't their biggest killer. Disease was. Without modern medicine, a simple infection could wipe out entire communities. A broken bone that didn't heal properly could mean death. Childbirth was incredibly dangerous for both mothers and children. Yet somehow, they developed medical treatments that worked well enough to keep populations stable and growing. They discovered plant medicines that we're still using today. Willow bark for pain relief, the original aspirin, echinacea for immune system support, digitalis for heart problems. Hundreds of effective treatments derived from careful observation and experimentation. But their real medical breakthrough was surgery. Archaeologists have found skulls from 5,000 years ago showing evidence of successful brain surgery, trepanation, drilling holes in skulls to relieve pressure or treat head injuries, and the bone shows signs of healing, meaning patients survived these procedures. They were performing brain surgery with stone tools successfully. They also developed sophisticated trauma treatment, setting broken bones, suturing wounds, even performing amputations when necessary. Skeletons show evidence of people surviving injuries that would kill someone without immediate modern medical intervention. But maybe their most impressive medical achievement was their approach to epidemic diseases. When plague or other infectious diseases hit a group, they had protocols that would impress modern epidemiologists. Isolation of sick individuals, quarantine procedures, contact tracing to identify potential carriers, mass movement of healthy individuals away from contaminated areas. They understood disease transmission and developed containment strategies that saved countless lives. But disease and warfare and predators weren't even their biggest challenge. The biggest threat was starvation. Despite their sophisticated hunting and gathering skills, food was often scarce. Droughts could eliminate plant foods for years. Climate changes could drive away animal populations. Natural disasters could destroy food stores. During the worst famines, groups would face impossible choices. Stay and starve, or risk everything on dangerous migrations to unknown territories. Most chose to migrate, even if it meant crossing territory controlled by hostile groups or traveling through landscapes filled with predators. These migration decisions required incredible courage and strategic thinking. They had to plan routes through dangerous territory. Coordinate movement of large groups, including children and elderly. Carry enough supplies for journeys that could take months. Navigate using only natural landmarks and celestial observations. And they had to do all this while fighting, fleeing, or avoiding groups that wanted to kill them. Some migrations covered thousands of miles across multiple climate zones. Imagine walking from Alaska to Mexico with your entire extended family carrying everything you own, with no maps, no supply lines, and hostile groups trying to stop you at every major river crossing. That's the kind of journey early humans routinely undertook when survival demanded it. But the most terrifying challenge they faced was volcanic winter. About 74,000 years ago, Mount Toba in Indonesia erupted with the force of several nuclear weapons. Ash clouds circled the globe, temperatures dropped worldwide, plant life died, animal populations crashed. This event nearly ended human civilization. Genetic analysis suggests that the entire human population was reduced to maybe 10,000 individuals. Worldwide, we came closer to extinction than any other point in human history. But again, somehow, they made it through. How? By developing survival strategies so extreme they seem almost impossible. Some groups survived by following retreating ice sheets, hunting the few animals that could survive in Arctic conditions. Others migrated to coastal areas and survived primarily on shellfish and seaweed. Some moved to underground environments and lived like human moles for generations. They ate foods that modern humans wouldn't consider edible. Tree bark, insect larvae, grass seeds, anything with calories. They developed preservation techniques that could keep food edible for years. Smoking, drying, fermentation, underground storage. They turned marginal environments into survival resources through pure ingenuity. But the most impressive thing is that they maintained their cultural traditions even during these survival crises. Archaeological evidence shows that even during the worst famines and disasters, they continued making art, they continued conducting burial ceremonies, they continued teaching children traditional skills and knowledge. They understood that losing their culture was just another form of death. So they protected their traditions as fiercely as they protected their lives. This is what separates humans from every other species. When other animals face existential threats, they focus purely on biological survival. When humans face existential threats, they fight to preserve not just their lives, but their way of life. Even when they were reduced to eating tree bark and hiding in caves, they were still humans, still creating, still teaching, still maintaining the cultural traditions that defined who they were. But survival came at a cost. The physical evidence shows that life was hard on their bodies. Skeletons reveal injuries that never fully healed, arthritis from constant physical stress, dental wear from eating rough foods, signs of malnutrition during lean periods. The psychological stress must have been incredible too. Constant vigilance against predators, regular loss of family members to disease, accident, or violence. The pressure of making life or death decisions that affected entire groups. Modern people develop PTSD from far less traumatic experiences. These people lived with trauma as a daily reality, yet somehow they maintained stable family structures and social bonds. They raised children who grew up to be successful adults. They created communities that lasted for thousands of years. How did they handle the psychological pressure? Through community support systems that modern psychology is only beginning to understand. Shared storytelling that helped process traumatic experiences, ritual activities that provided meaning and purpose during difficult times, close family bonds that provided emotional security, regular celebrations that reinforced group identity and morale. They also had spiritual practices that helped them cope with uncertainty and loss, not organized religion as we know it, but belief systems that provided comfort and guidance during crises. Archaeological evidence suggests they believed in life after death, spiritual protection from ancestors, and meaningful connections between humans and the natural world. These beliefs provided psychological resources that helped them endure suffering and loss. But perhaps most importantly, they had a sense of purpose that modern people often lack. Every individual had a clear, important role in group survival. Every skill they developed had direct relevance to their well-being and the well-being of people they cared about. Every day presented challenges that required their full intelligence and creativity. They weren't struggling with meaninglessness or purposelessness. They were struggling with real challenges that demanded real solutions. And they were succeeding against impossible odds. They were not just surviving, but growing stronger, smarter, and more sophisticated. But their greatest test was still coming. Around 40,000 years ago, the climate became even more unstable. Ice sheets advanced and retreated rapidly. Sea levels rose and fell dramatically. Entire ecosystems appeared and disappeared within single generations. This period of extreme environmental chaos would determine whether humans were just another species that got lucky for a while, or whether they had truly become something new. The next few thousand years would test every survival strategy they had developed, every innovation they had created, every social bond they had built. Some groups wouldn't make it. Entire human populations disappeared during this period, leaving behind only archaeological traces of their existence. But others would not just survive. They would use this period of crisis to develop the most sophisticated technologies, art forms, and social systems in human history. They would emerge from this crucible as fully modern humans, ready to colonize the entire planet and eventually build civilizations that would dominate the Earth. But first, they had to survive the ultimate test, and the way they did it would reveal just how extraordinary these people really were. They passed the test. Not just barely, not just scraping by, they absolutely crushed it. The period from 40,000 to 10,000 years ago, what archaeologists call the Upper Paleolithic, was when humans became unstoppable, when they went from surviving to dominating, when they transformed from just another species competing for resources into the most successful life form in Earth's history. And they did it during the worst environmental conditions our planet had seen in millions of years. While ice sheets were advancing and retreating chaotically, while sea levels were rising and falling by hundreds of feet, while entire continents were becoming uninhabitable, humans were having their greatest period of innovation and expansion. It's like they used the crisis as fuel for creativity. During this period, they invented art as we know it, not just cave paintings, but sculpture, jewellery, decorative objects, and portable art that travelled with nomadic groups. The Lascaux caves in France, the Venus figurines found across Europe, intricate bone carvings that required hundreds of hours of detailed work. But this wasn't just art for art's sake. It was a communication revolution. These artistic traditions created shared cultural languages that could unite groups across vast distances. A person from what's now Germany could travel to Spain and immediately recognize familiar artistic symbols and cultural practices. Art became the first global communication system. They also perfected their musical traditions during this period, not just those bone flutes we talked about earlier, but entire orchestras of prehistoric instruments. Drums, whistles, rattles, stringed instruments made from sinew and wood. Recent analysis of cave acoustics suggests they chose specific locations for musical performances based on their sound properties. They were creating concert halls 30,000 years before anyone built an actual concert hall. But the most incredible innovation was their social technology. Faced with unprecedented environmental challenges, they developed cooperation systems that allowed hundreds of people to work together toward common goals. Trade networks that spanned continents, information sharing systems that spread innovations across thousands of miles within decades. They created the first global civilization. And they did it without writing, without formal governments, without any of the organizational tools we think are necessary for large-scale cooperation. How? Through shared cultural practices that created trust and cooperation between groups that had never met before. If you could make the same type of spear point, create the same artistic symbols, and perform the same ritual practices as someone else, you were probably safe to trade with them, maybe even camp with them, perhaps exchange marriage partners and form permanent alliances. Culture became a technology for scaling cooperation beyond the limits of personal relationships. This is when humans developed what researchers call cumulative culture, the ability to build on previous innovations rather than constantly starting over. Each generation could improve on what came before, leading to exponential advancement in tools, techniques, and knowledge. And it worked so well that humans started colonizing the entire planet. During the Upper Paleolithic, humans reached Australia by building boats and navigating across 60 miles of open ocean. They colonized the Arctic, developing cold weather technologies that allowed them to survive in temperatures that kill most mammals. They crossed the Bering Land Bridge and spread throughout the Americas in less than 2,000 years. From Alaska to the southern tip of South America, adapting to every environment they encountered. Rainforests, deserts, mountains, coasts, grasslands, tundra. Every ecosystem on Earth became home to human communities, but they weren't just spreading randomly. They were adapting intelligently to each new environment, developing specialized technologies and cultures optimized for local conditions. Arctic peoples developed sophisticated ice fishing techniques, snow shelter construction, and cold weather clothing that wouldn't be improved upon until modern synthetic materials. Desert peoples developed water conservation and navigation techniques that allowed them to thrive in environments where most animals couldn't survive. Coastal peoples developed advanced boat building, deep-sea fishing, and marine resource management that sustained large populations for thousands of years. Mountain peoples developed high-altitude survival techniques, specialized hunting equipment, and vertical ecosystem management. Each environment produced unique innovations that eventually spread through trade networks to benefit humans worldwide. And through all of this expansion and innovation, they maintained their core human qualities: art, music, storytelling, spiritual practices, family bonds, community cooperation. They didn't lose their humanity in pursuit of survival. They preserved and enhanced it. By 10,000 years ago, when the Ice Age finally ended and agriculture began, humans had become something unprecedented in the history of life on Earth. They were a species that could survive anywhere, adapt to anything, and improve their conditions through intelligence and cooperation rather than just genetic evolution. They had developed technologies for every aspect of human life, tools for every conceivable task, social systems for every type of challenge, cultural practices that provided meaning, purpose, and psychological resilience. They had become master survivors. But here's what really blows my mind. When the Ice Age ended and conditions became easier, they didn't settle back and relax. They used their accumulated knowledge and skills to create something entirely new. Agriculture, permanent settlements, specialized crafts, complex societies, eventually cities, writing, and formal governments. The foundation for everything we call civilization was built by people who learned to thrive during the most challenging environmental conditions in human history. Every innovation that followed, from agriculture to the internet, was built on knowledge and skills developed by our Paleolithic ancestors. The ability to plan long-term projects, the capacity for complex cooperation, the skills for tool-making and problem-solving, the social bonds that make large-scale societies possible, the creative impulses that drive art, music, and scientific discovery. All of this came from those primitive cavemen, but what does this mean for us today? First, it means we're capable of way more than we think. The same brains that survived ice ages and volcanic winters are the brains we carry around today. The same capacity for innovation, cooperation, and resilience that got our ancestors through impossible challenges is still available to us. When we look at modern problems, climate change, resource depletion, social conflicts, we're not facing anything more challenging than what our ancestors routinely overcame. They survived global environmental disasters with stone tools and animal skin clothing. We have technology they couldn't imagine. If they could figure out solutions to existential threats, we can definitely handle whatever we're facing now. Second, it means we've lost touch with some fundamental human capabilities that we might want to recover. The ability to read natural environments and predict weather patterns, the skills for making tools and useful objects with our hands, the capacity for deep cooperation and mutual support, the practice of integrating work, family, art, and community into a cohesive lifestyle. These aren't primitive throwbacks. These are advanced human capabilities that contributed to 300,000 years of successful survival and development. Modern life has given us incredible advantages, but it's also disconnected us from some core human strengths that might be worth rediscovering. Third, it means we come from an absolutely incredible lineage. Your ancestors weren't just lucky survivors, they were innovative geniuses who repeatedly overcame impossible challenges through intelligence, creativity, and cooperation. You carry genes that survived ice ages, volcanic winters, predator attacks, and near-extinction events. You inherit cognitive capabilities that were tested and refined by hundreds of thousands of years of solving life-or-death problems. You're not just the descendant of survivors, you're the descendant of champions. But maybe most importantly, the story of our Paleolithic ancestors reminds us what humans are capable of when we really need to step up. When facing existential threats, they didn't panic or give up. They got creative, they cooperated, they innovated, they adapted. When resources were scarce, they found new sources or developed ways to use resources more efficiently. When environments became hostile, they developed technologies to survive or migrated to better conditions. When social conflicts arose, they created diplomatic solutions or defended themselves effectively. They met every challenge with intelligence, determination, and mutual support. And they didn't just survive, they thrived. They created art, music, and cultural traditions that brought joy and meaning to their lives even during the most difficult periods. They understood that preserving their humanity was as important as preserving their lives. That's the real legacy of our caveman ancestors. Not primitive survival, but sophisticated human living under challenging conditions. They proved that humans can adapt to anything, survive everything, and maintain their essential humanity through any crisis. They showed us what we're capable of when we need to be. So the next time you're facing a challenge that seems impossible, remember where you came from. Remember that your ancestors survived things that would end modern civilization. Remember that you carry in your genes and your brain the accumulated wisdom of 300,000 years of human problem solving. Remember that every challenge you face has been faced before by people with far fewer resources who not only survived but found ways to thrive. And remember that being human isn't about having easy lives, it's about rising to meet whatever challenges life presents with intelligence, creativity, cooperation, and determination. That's what it meant to be a caveman, and that's what it means to be human today. The only difference is that now we know our own history, we know what we're capable of, we know that we come from the greatest survivors in the history of life on Earth, and we know that whatever challenges we face in the future, we have everything we need to overcome them. Because we're not just modern humans, we're the descendants of cavemen, and cavemen were absolutely extraordinary.